Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Monday Morning Tea with me. It's so good to be back. I'm happy to be back on track with everything now that we're done. Today, we're going to be talking about how to have healthy relationships and distance yourself from toxic, codependent, or enmeshed ones. So we're going to start by talking about how do you know if a relationship is positive or negative, the signs and symptoms. Then we'll talk a little bit about what codependence, what enmeshment means, and what toxic means. I'll give you a super easy tool to use to measure your relationships by, and then we'll talk about how do you create more of these healthy relationships and how do you start desensitizing or detaching from these enmeshed ones. So we got lots of stuff to cover today. So first of all, how do you know if a relationship that you're in is positive or negative? One of the easiest ways to find out is how do you feel when you're with that person? Now, obviously, everybody has their days, right? Being that we're human, nobody's perfect, we're all going to have off days, off weeks, maybe even an off month. The world we're living in is crazy right now. There's so much fear, so much anger, and nobody has any tools to deal with them. So, therefore, be slightly compassionate with what people have going on, their circumstances, their situations, and take it into consideration, but don't necessarily let it keep dragging on. Hi, Gaia. So one of the things that you'll notice when you're in a relationship that's not serving you will be that you feel bad. You feel down when you're around a person who is taking from you. They're always taking from you, right? So they're constantly taking, and never giving anything back in return. Or if you feel drained when they're around, right? So if they show up and your energy starts to go down, or they leave and you just feel like someone sucked all the energy out of you, that's a red flag as well. One of the easiest ways to tell is, do you ever get to talk about yourself? Or is the other person constantly only talking about themselves? Do they ever ask how you're doing, how your day was? Are they listening? Do they know what's happening in your life? Do they ask how a certain project went that they knew that you were working on, or at least hopefully should have known since you mentioned it? Or, are they paying attention to you? Even when you are talking, are they listening? Are they on their phone? Are they interrupting you to talk about something else without actually acknowledging that you're talking? So what is the communication like between you and the person? Are they supportive? When something good happens in your life, do they celebrate you? Or do they try to minimize your happiness? Or do they try to one-up you? Or do they just stop talking? Are they so jealous that they can't even engage in the rest of the conversation? So these are all some of the red flags that you'll find when you're in a relationship that's not necessarily serving you. And when I say serving you, I don't mean they're serving you hand and foot. I mean benefiting you in some way, helping you to grow, helping you to be a better person. And it could be a romantic relationship, it could be a friendship, it could be a business acquaintance, it could even be family, right? Frequently it is family, and we'll get to that. What do you do when it is family? So let's talk about a toxic relationship. What does being in a toxic relationship look like? Well, when you're in a toxic relationship, you have more frequent times where you feel badly about yourself than there are when there are times that you feel good about yourself. So the other person is very critical, very judgmental, very blamey, does a lot of gaslighting. Gaslighting is a new thing. Look it up on the internet for a more thorough description. But it's basically when someone takes your words, you might just be saying something very simple, twists them around and creates something to blame you for when really there was nothing to blame you for in the first place, just in order to feel powerful. to feel like they're in control. So it's a very interesting thing. Is your relationship codependent? So a codependent relationship is interesting. It can be really sneaky. It's basically, codependence is when you rely on someone, on serving someone to feel good about yourself. You rely on the service of others to gain self-esteem. I'm not saying that there's anything bad about serving others. Obviously, that's what I do for a living. I do it all day long, whether I'm being paid or not. I'm saying when you use it as a source of self-esteem, that could get really codependent. Because what happens if you don't have a dependent? Now, a dependent is someone who relies on other people for pretty much everything, or sometimes not everything, right? You can seek dependent relationships all around when one person relies on someone else for emotion, right? Or to feel good, or relies on someone to take care of them. That would be a codependent relationship. They feel or think or act as if they are incapable of doing anything for themselves. But not always anything. That's why codependent relationships can be tricky. Maybe it's just in one area of life. With one person, you become codependent. And you can feel that a dependent is trying to enmesh you and ensnare you into a codependent relationship because you feel kind of a pulling from them. It feels like they're pulling on your soul to try to engage you. And if you have a Florence Nightingale tendency, which I know I certainly do, when someone needs you, you will show up in every way, shape, or form. It's when you need to show up for someone in order to feel good about yourself that it becomes codependent. So that is kind of a little bit about what a codependent relationship is. It's usually the caretaker that is the codependent because they need a dependent in order to be involved in a codependent relationship. And you'll also find some codependent people trying to make you into a dependent. So trying to take away your liberty and your freedom and your independence by saying things like, just in my experience, by saying things like, what would you do without me? Thank God I came along when I did because you would be a mess. Or just constantly telling you that you are a mess. What a mess. Thank God you have me. These kinds of little jibes tend to be what codependent people use in order to gain a new dependent. Especially if it's someone of authority so that you actually believe everything that they're saying. If you're in your right mind, you're like, right, okay, that's nice. You are also very toxic and probably codependent. I'm not going to hang out with you anymore. And then an enmeshed relationship is a little bit more tricky to define, but enmeshment is basically when your feelings and someone else's feelings are so closely intertwined. Your personality and someone else's personality are too closely intertwined. You know, only one person has an opinion, the other person just kind of, yes, whatever you say, whatever you think. Or, let me think of an example. Or the dependency upon one person being available to do anything. I'm thinking of a mother-daughter relationship. No one that you know, that, because they're not even in this town, or wherever you are. I forget, we're not only in Santa Clarita. I am, but that doesn't mean that you are. So mother-daughter that, you know, the mom couldn't do anything without the daughter, and the daughter felt like she couldn't do anything without the mom. So it wasn't codependent, it was enmeshed. They were both dependent upon each other to feel good, to do activities, to, anything, to eat, to go grocery shopping. It was so enmeshed that they refused to be without each other. Now, if they're happy in that enmeshed relationship, then awesome. By all means, continue in your enmeshment. It's only when one of the people in the enmeshed relationship is not satisfied with the way that the relationship is going. So it doesn't mean it has to be a parent and daughter. It could be friends who are enmeshed. It could be, you know, business partners that are enmeshed. It could be business associates or, you know, whatever, anything you can think of that could create enmeshment. You're basically making someone else responsible for your well-being rather than taking responsibility for yourself. When both of those people are doing it to each other, then it becomes enmeshment. If you have any questions, by the way, please feel free to ask questions below. and I'd be happy to answer them, maybe in a future video or a live or whatever. So here is a great tool to use in order to clarify what kinds of relationships you have going on in your life. And it doesn't mean it's going to tell you, is it toxic, is it codependent, is it enmeshed? It just means, what are you giving in compared with what are you getting? For example, nope, we're just going to skip to the tool. Because any examples that I are going to talk about are just inappropriate. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the tool itself. So this is the table of reciprocity. I love this one. It's so simple. And it's about who brings corn to your table. So imagine that you have a table. This is your table of life, and on it's laden with all of these delicious foods, a sumptuous feast, right? This is your table. These are all of your gifts. It may be fuller than you thought. You might have more food on there than you actually thought you did, but everybody has a lot of things to give, to contribute to this world. So this is your table. It's got your name on a plaque at the head of the table. And there are rules to people participating in this feast. There are rules to people participating in your feast of life. Rule number 1, nobody may sit down unless they contribute something. That doesn't mean that they have to also bring a feast, right? No one person is going to give you everything that you need in this world. No one. But maybe they bring you the gift of spirituality. Maybe they bring you the gift of insight. Maybe they're really direct and straight with you and will call you on your BS. Or maybe they are fun. Maybe they're just someone you like to go dancing with. Maybe they're a super fun drinking partner. Right? I know, I'm sure. Kaya, but obviously you and I have talked about this at length. So, nobody's allowed to sit down at your table unless they actually contribute something. So they must bring something to the table. They're not allowed to sit down empty-handed, right? They can't just sit down and take. So you see someone coming up to the table and you actually have to enforce the rule, because why? This is your table. You are the host of this feast. It's your duty. Now, some of you might be thinking, what if I don't want to reinforce the rules? Well, that's absolutely within your prerogative. You don't have to enforce any rules that you don't want. But if you don't, then you also have to equally accept the consequences of not enforcing the rules. You don't get to complain about it anymore. You get to have a choice. Either you don't like it and you do something about it. You enforce rule number 1, which is they may not sit down without contributing some corn to the table, or you don't complain about it and you don't do anything. You suffer in silence. I don't know why you would choose to suffer in silence. It's just not my way and it's not what I teach. But it is your prerogative. So if that is you, by all means, go right ahead and don't enforce your rules. Rule number 2 is a person who sits at your table. Exactly. Everybody has their own table, right? My name is on my table. This is my table. These are my rules. You don't like them? You go ahead and go to your table and you enforce whatever rules you want to at your table. Now, probably it's not going to be your super fun table like my table, so you might want to just bend a little bit into my rules, but you know what? You have a choice. That's exactly right. Rule number 2 is anybody who sits down may only take an equal amount of what they give. This one is the tricky one, right? Especially for us givers, especially for us nurturers, those of us who are moms or healers or just have just a naturally generous tendency. This rule is actually the hardest to enforce because we will give first. And there's nothing wrong with giving. I actually am try to be. I focus on being a super generous person with my time, with my effort, with my energy, with my love, with my compassion. That's who I am, and I love being that person. However, I have really strict boundaries set up, and someone sets off my tripwire, and they're off my table. So, 2 rules. Rule number 1, you may only sit down at my table if you contribute something. And rule number 2 is you may only take an equal amount to what you bring. Again, you have to enforce that. It's up to you. This is your table. Do you want happy, healthy relationships? I'm assuming that you're saying yes. If yes, you enforce the rules. If no, good. This video is not for you. Simple as that. There's a video somewhere else for you. It's not going to be anywhere on my page, but welcome. If that's you and you're here, then great. Hopefully you will learn something and take it from today. There is an exception. The exception is if someone comes along that is so destitute that you could help and you have plenty of resources to be able to help them, by all means, do it. But notice that you give it as a gift. You do not give it with any strings attached. You give it simply just to give it because that feels good, and not even because it feels good, because you can and because you choose to, right? You give that as a gift. You let the strings go. The same as you would give away $1 to someone, on the corner. That's how you give a gift in an exception. You give a gift of love, you give a gift of money, you give a gift of food, you give a gift of time. Give it as a gift, you put a little neat bow around it, and you send it off into the world. You don't expect anything back from them. Just give it because you can, right? But can you imagine how your table would look if you continuously gave and gave and gave and gave and gave? There would be no food left for you. You would starve. And you know that because there are those days when you get to the end of the day and you feel depleted and you feel defeated and you wonder, what have I done to draw these kinds of relationships into my life where no one is looking out for me, right? That's the sign. It means you've just been giving and giving and giving without setting these boundaries, setting these rules. Rule number 1, you can only take what you give. Actually, that's rule number 2. Rule number 1 is you may not sit down unless you give something. So those are the exceptions. Now, am I saying that you're doing a checks and balances system? Am I saying that you're keeping score? No, actually. I do all of this on an intuitive basis. I meet someone and I want to pour into their lives. That's just my instinct. I want to help them. Here's books. Here's my time. Here is what I can do for you. Here's a video. Here's an MP3. Here is, my loving energy, even if I have nothing else to give you. Aww, I know. I love you too, Karen. You're so welcome. It's such a pleasure. So I love to pour into people, right? But the moment that I start feeling depleted around that person is when my rules come into place. Frequently, you don't even have to worry because so often, well, for me, because my rules naturally select certain people into my life, I don't ever really get to that point. But sometimes my guard is down and people sneak in under the radar. And as soon as I start to feel depleted from that person, as soon as I start to feel like I'm giving more than I'm getting, boom, rule number 1, rule number 2 come into play. So I evaluate that friendship. Are they bringing something? Yes, they are. Okay, are they taking more than they're bringing? Yes, they are. Great. Now it's time for me to pull back. Okay, so that's how to create the relationship. That's how you can create those loving and healthy relationships. Is the person giving to you as well as taking from you? Symbiotic. You also have to be in a relationship with someone who will receive. If you continue to take, you'll become that person. Don't do that. If I have someone in my life, and my friends can attest to this, if there's someone in my life who will only give to me, I will literally sit down with them, or not even sit down, but have a direct conversation that says, I will not receive a single thing more from you unless you let me do something for you. I won't. I refuse to become involved in that kind of dynamic. And then, usually they don't realize that. Usually they just struggle with receiving, right, for self-esteem reasons. Not their fault, but I like to bring it to people's attention because that's what I do. That's what I do. I notice a blinder and I will gently bring it to people, right? So that's how to create these healthy relationships. Sure, give, but as soon as you start to feel depleted from that relationship, put the 2 rules in place. Boom, healthy relationship. Also, one thing that's really important to note is the most effective time to set a boundary is the first time an unacceptable behavior happens. Let me give you an example. I used to work at a wine bar when I was training as a hypnotherapist. And one of the customers was famous, very rich, obviously thought he could do whatever he wanted. So at the end of my shift, I'm saying goodbye to everybody, and it's a super supportive environment where all the customers love the staff. It's really a sweet place, and I loved working there. And I was saying goodbye to this gentleman, and he grabs me and he grabs my hair and he pulls my hair back, and he says, "You've been waiting for someone to do this to you all night, haven't you?" WTF. Now, I was in such shock because nobody has ever treated me with that little, well, I mean, people have, but I've never, not in an environment at work, right? So I didn't really know what to say. I was just like, I just kind of like extricated myself from the situation, grabbed my stuff and left. But then I remembered and I realized that that would have been the most effective moment to set my boundaries. That would have been the most effective because once you let someone do something one time, they will create an automatic association in their mind that will say, "I can always do this," right? And you'll notice this in society and also in your own life. So the next time I came back to the bar, and sure enough, he tried something else. He tried to grab my hand and he tried to kiss it. And that to me is so inappropriate, not only because, I had a boyfriend, but also because I'm working. And who gives you the right to think you can do whatever you want? No, sorry, not happening. So I pulled my hand back and he was like, "Don't be like that." And I was like, "I did not give you permission to touch me, and you will not touch me again." And I went back behind the bar, and he was butthurt about it because not a lot of people stand up to him, I suppose, because of who he is and whatever. It's totally fine. But we made amends throughout the rest of the night, and he told everybody that I was mad at him, and I said, "No, I'm not mad at you, but when you treat me in a disrespectful manner, I am going to say something about it." And that was it. It was super kind, super compassionate, but just very firm in my boundaries. I wasn't angry with him. I was just very strongly holding my ground. And let me tell you, never again, not even once in the next 2 years that we were acquainted, did he ever try something like that again. And I noticed him doing it with pretty much anyone who sat next to him. And I saw them doing the same thing that I had accidentally done the first time, not setting boundaries, just kind of being in shock that someone would do that, and then kind of going with the flow, right? So the first time that the unacceptable behavior happens is when you need to say something about it. It doesn't have to be angry, although if anger is all you have, then use it. But it can be something simply quiet and calm. I'm much more quiet than I am explosive. And so my anger is very internal and I get very still. So as an example, there was a lady. I was helping her cook at her house. She was in the family. And she said something that was absolutely humiliating in front of the whole family and all of their friends. And something like, well, if Abby had bothered to help at all, then maybe some more stuff would get done. I'm a little bit more classy than to have have an altercation right in front of everybody, but you can trust me, I was fuming. But later on that night, I pulled her aside. I said, "Hey, can we talk?" And so I pulled her aside and I said, "That was absolutely unacceptable what you did. First of all, because it wasn't true, because I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that. So it wasn't true and you said it anyway. It was not acceptable to say it in front of that many people. And if you ever treat me with that kind of disrespect again, we will no longer have a relationship." I was super kind, super compassionate, but very firm. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't being sarcastic. I wasn't being passive-aggressive even. I was just being very direct. What you did was unacceptable. It will never happen again. Otherwise, here is the consequence. Simple. And if she didn't want a relationship or if she did do it again, okay, fine. Then we wouldn't have a relationship. No skin off my nose. It's a shame to have that kind of dynamic, but it would have been fine. However, It never happened again. All of a sudden, her respect level for me shot way up, and she became my biggest advocate, which was so weird to me. But whatever, bullies shoot for weak people. People who are strong, bullies are drawn to. Sometimes. Okay, so what happens if you are already engaged or involved in a enmeshed, toxic, or codependent relationship? Probably the hardest thing would also not be the wisest thing, right? To cut the relationship off cold would not be the smartest thing to do, not only for that person, but also for you, right? It would come along with guilt and shame and all of those kinds of things. Hi, Jen! So when you're involved in this kind of relationship that's not serving you very well, don't necessarily cut it off cold turkey. Unless every single interaction that you have with this person is damaging your soul, then yes, cut it off cold turkey, whatever. Delete, block, whatever you need to do in order to end the engagement with this person. But an easy way to start disengaging with these kinds of relationships is don't arrange activities. Don't be around the person. Then you won't get yourself into this kind of situation, and they won't be allowed to deplete you, right? Just don't be around them. Don't say yes to an event that you don't want to go to, right? We talked a little bit about that when we talked about authenticity. Don't go to a place that they're going to be intentionally. Or if you are going to go to that place, make sure you just don't engage with them, right? So don't say yes to activities. Stop responding to text messages. Such an easy thing to do. I've had clients in my office that are so sad, so hurt by someone's actions towards them. And yet, the person will text them or message them or, call them, and they'll answer the phone. You're teaching them, when someone does this to you, you're teaching them that they can treat you however they feel like, and you will still pick up the phone when they call. You will still be available to respond to their text messages. No! Unacceptable. So just don't respond to the text messages. You might get another, well, why haven't you responded? Did you hear? Okay, whatever. The intention is to distance yourself. So you're not trying to create more closeness by responding to their text messages or phone calls. You're trying to distance yourself, right? Say no. They ask you to do something you don't want to do it, just say no. It doesn't have to be, well, you did this and I said that and da-da-da-da-da. No. Oh, sorry. I can't. That's it. No excuse necessary. Sorry. I can't. Doesn't have to be because you're doing something either. I can't because I don't want to. Right? Now let's take this to family. Family is a little bit more tricky because, your family is supposed to be there for you through thick and thin. Blood is thicker than water, things like that. The same rules apply when it comes to family. They're just much harder to enforce, right? Because there's family gatherings, there's birthdays, there's all kinds of situations. But the exact same rules apply. Number one, you do not get to sit at the table if you do not bring something. Rule number two is you can only take an equal amount to what you bring. So the same rules apply. Now, if you're distancing yourself from somebody, it doesn't mean you have to stop seeing them altogether. It doesn't mean you have to stop being friends with them. It means they don't get to sit at the table, though. They don't get to use your resources. They don't get to take advantage of all the things that you have been doing from them. You distance yourself. You create some space, some time between yourself and that person. Again, if you have any questions, please put them down here. This is a super complicated subject, and it definitely warrants more time than just this one video. But it's something I'm really passionate about, developing healthy boundaries, because I believe when you have healthy boundaries in your life, you're capable of reaching those heights that you can see yourself at. As you're trying to get to those heights, if you don't have healthy boundaries, you literally have people hanging on your ankles and sucking out all the energy that should be going towards the project that's taking you to where you're going, right? So I'm a super huge advocate for healthy boundaries. That's why I wanted to cover it today. And I also know that it is tricky. We don't learn it as we grow up. Again, questions, comments, concerns, please pop them in the comment box below. And other than that, thank you so much for your time and attention today, guys. I love you, and I wish you all the best of everything. Have a great day.